everybody, and welcome to GamerVision, the show where we talk about whatever goes on in our heads as far as like video games are concerned.
It could
Video
be
games.
it
We
could be
focus,
weird stuff. Who knows?
yeah, we try to focus on video games. But before we get into it, he is Tony from Procedurally Generated, and I am Jeff from Just One More Level. How you doing, Tony?
Doing good, doing really good. This is going to be an interesting conversation, I think.
That's it deals with Metroid Dread, which I've seen that you've put some time into that.
I have
So
rolled credits, 11 hours in-game time. That game is... I'm going to let it stew a little bit. I think that game may end up on the top of my Game of the Year list, though.
2021 has proven to be a pretty good year for gaming. Like all of the platforms seem to be doing pretty well, and it's actually the focal point of one of the topic today about emulation, because the early Switches were hacked. The release of Metroid Dread is kind of it kind of puts Nintendo in a dreadful predicament.
Maybe. To be honest, I don't know how much Nintendo really cares or is really going to be affected by this. Like, I've seen tons and tons of conversations this week about the legality of emulation, the morality of emulation. Will it or won't it have an impact on Nintendo, the sales of Metroid Dread, and so on and so forth? Because Metroid Dread, within the first few days, was already running on an emulator.
And I've seen now. Granted, I haven't actually seen it running on the emulated hardware or whatever, but I've heard some people say that it runs better on emulators, which is a little weird.
It's all
But
for if the emulator is good enough, and apparently the couple of Switch emulators that are out there are really good. If you have a really good PC, you're going to be able to run the game incredibly well. You're going to be able to run it up to like 4K. It's not obviously going to be 4K because those assets are not made to be looked at in 4K. They're going to be upscaled. It's going to run at 60 frames a second though, which the game does on the Switch. So you're not getting a big boost there. Really, I don't understand why you would want to play it on an emulator because you're not going to get that much better performance. The game is incredible on the Switch. I have an OG Switch. I have a Switch Lite, and it runs so well on both of those. It looks so good.
and and one thing that we do want to put a little mark,
Little asterisk up in there.
yeah, that's just something to remember. We're not taking the stance of trying to say that emulation is illegal. We're not. It's not.
No, it's 100%
More,
legal, technically. There is nothing wrong or illegal about running software on an emulator. If you own that software and you have the ability to get a copy of it, usually you're supposed to do it your own ways. Of course, some people then do take that shortcut of finding the ROMs and putting them on an emulator. But it is not illegal to play games on an emulator.
and for the most part, like it's one of those things where it's kind of a morality type thing. My standpoint with it is like, well, my standpoint's kind of shifted as the years have gone on, and like how the industry has changed. Like I now kind of take the stance of like, if it's 2 generations old, I find it okay to emulate a game, because especially like for me, where it's like I want like the physical thing. The secondhand market right now has completely made it
It's gone out.
next,
It's
yeah,
gotten out of
like
hands.
next to impossible.
Yeah.
Like next to impossible to get those things.
My biggest thing, and I've gone back and forth on the emulator thing, over the years. As a teenager, I was like, I don't care. Just if I can play it and I have to use an emulator, I'm going to do it, because I was a stupid teenager
Yeah.
who didn't have any money and didn't know any better, really. But I do go back and forth, and my general thinking is, if a game is not commercially available in a way that's going to benefit the people that actually created that thing, then it's fair game. Like an NES game that you can't get anywhere else, that is made from a tiny publisher who is gone, and you
Yeah.
don't know who owns the rights to that anymore. Those games are not available anywhere to purchase. If you want to play that on emulator, go ahead. It's not going to hurt anybody. Nothing is going to happen. But if you're
Yeah.
going out there and you're downloading a ROM of Metroid Dread and you don't have it, don't do that. Especially
Yeah.
for a series like Metroid that is on thin ice to begin with. It doesn't sell
Yeah.
well. It's not a huge selling franchise. The Switch may change that, and Metroid Dread may change that, but Metroid Dread had to perform well if Nintendo is going to continue putting money in this franchise.
Just the release of Dread. Like I remember in one of our previous episodes, like we talked about like 15 years. It took 15 years
19
for
years. It's been
19
19
years,
years.
19 years for this game to come out, and it's because publishers and developers, while they want to be creative, they also have to think of, well, if we put money into this and it doesn't sell well, we're losing money on it, and if
Yeah.
we're losing money on it, too many of those missteps, too many miscues,
Mm-hmm.
and we're closing our doors.
Yeah.
And like with me, like I want to support the developers first and foremost. I want the developers to get the support because they're ultimately the ones making the games that we're playing, the stuff that we enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
With this hobby, it's an expensive hobby, but
It is.
like
Yeah.
I want the developers to be able to continue making creative games, and
Yeah.
I don't want just we're reaching that point, and I think Sean Layden in one of his recent interviews he talked about like game development just continues to get more and more expensive, which makes companies less and less likely to be creative,
Mm-hmm.
and emulation kind of plays into that, piracy plays into that.
It killed
You
the
know,
PSP.
yeah,
Like
it did.
piracy
Like
straight up killed the PSP.
the the hardware sold really well. It sold 88 million units, which it was up against the DS, and the DS sold like 160 something million. So like, by comparison, it didn't do too well.
Yeah.
But it sold 88 million units, but the software never took off because from day one it was hacked,
Yeah.
and it was a pirated machine at that point.
And
Like,
that's why we got the Vita. Like the Vita was a direct
yeah,
response to the piracy issue on the PSP.
yes.
Um,
All of the proprietary things that ironically ultimately killed the Vita as well.
yeah, that's
Um,
true. The early
so
indications of Metroid Dread sales seem to indicate that this is not a huge deal. Like it's you
yeah,
can get Metroid Dread running on an emulator, but your average consumer is not going to do what it takes to do, because while it's not incredibly
yeah,
difficult, it's not an super easy process either, like it is with the
yeah,
PSP. I have a modded PSP, and it is 10 minutes worth of work to get a PSP running emulated software. Um, but yeah, for like 33 months now, the Switch has been the best-selling system. Metroid Dread seems straight out of the gate to be doing incredibly well. Like
yeah,
it was the best-selling game in the franchise in, like, I think the UK. Those sales numbers came out. Um,
yeah. Well,
so
and you know, looking at it, the Switch very well within crossing 100 million units sold, and it's like it's about to wrap up its fourth year on the market. I believe it came out in 2017, March 2017.
yeah.
Um, so like it's doing fine. Software is just going through the roof. Like Animal Crossing New Horizons.
Hmm.
I had a little brain fart there of the subtitle for that, but it did like 20 million units sold in its first year. So like the Switch is doing fine, but
Yeah, it
it'll
is.
be interesting to see just how things go, moving forward, and if the competition starts getting more hardware available, will that start to affect things? Who knows?
Yeah.
So yeah, the Switch across the board
Yeah.
is doing well across all markets, like Europe, North America, the East Asia
Hmm.
market. So the Switch is doing fine, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon, even if like Sony and Microsoft start getting uh, more hardware available. I am kind of curious to see like what Nintendo will do as far as like a successor, because there is some things like with the dock, they're finding that it's 4K 60 capable,
Yeah.
which lends the support that they were trying to do more of like a pro model.
I think the dock is future proofed for whatever comes next. I think
Yeah.
Nintendo is going to continue the Switch style thing, whatever that is. Like it has been too successful for them to go back to a straight handheld or a straight console.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see what they do for the next generation. Because we're probably a couple of years from that. I don't know that we'll see a Switch Pro at this point, but we'll see whatever comes
Yeah.
next.
I kind of feel like the Pro would have taken the place of the OLED.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
the OLED and the Pro were going to be the one and the same.
I think the OLED was supposed to be the Pro, but they modified
Um,
it with all the chip shortages and everything like that.
but yeah, like we've seen, emulation. It's crippled some platforms. Like I said, the PSP still sold well in, all things considered. Developers and publishers, they need to see games do well.
Yeah,
Otherwise, we just, you know, eventually the industry would turn into just Call of Duty, Battlefield, Fortnite,
and we
and
don't
then
want that.
and we start losing out on the diversity of genres
Yeah,
because,
we don't want
oh,
everything to be samey.
yeah, like I love RPGs, but that doesn't mean that I want the entire industry to only be making RPGs. Like,
Every game should be Dragon Quest, man. Every game should be Dragon Quest.
I mean, if Square Enix would love that because they would just continue doing collections and remasters and ports and all that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
they would love that.
That's
Absolutely love that. But yeah, like I love Final Fantasy. I love the stuff that comes out of Dragon Quest. I love this kind of new era with Square Enix where they're trying new things like the Yoko Taro
true.
or Yo, yeah,
Yeah,
Yoko Taro.
yeah. The
The
Nier Automata
voice
guy.
of, yeah, with voice of cards. Like it's a fun RPG. It's a weird card battle system, but it's awesome. The dungeon encounters thing that Square Enix put out about a week ago, where it's simply just going through dungeons
Yeah.
and you're fighting monsters. It's just going tile by tile by tile, like just a super stripped down. But like, if developers and publishers don't see things selling well, they will
They won't
just
make them.
churn out.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll just make the next Call of Duty. They'll just make the next Battlefield. They'll just, I don't think Rockstar will ever get to GTA 6. They'll just continue to milk GTA 5. But like we will end up just having developers and publishers just playing it safe.
Yeah.
And I don't really want that. I want things to be creative, and the way that we support that is, well, spending money
Yeah.
on the things that are coming out.
And that sort of leads me to one of the opinions that I saw people talking about and saying this week was that I want to call out was it's always okay to pirate from $1 billion company. And that's just a scummy opinion. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, a lot of times I understand some, both sides of a lot of arguments, but this one I don't, because that is saying stealing is okay, and that's like saying Ford made that car, but I want it, so I can take it because they're a multi-billion-dollar company, and I deserve, or I'm entitled to that thing that they made, and made specifically to sell to other people, and like that's not a good opinion. Like, I don't often call out opinions, but that's one that I think is worth calling out. Because if you continue to steal from people and they don't make any money on the things that they make, they're not going to make those things, and you'll see the gaming industry just dry up. Nobody will ever make anything if everybody just steals it from them.
Yeah, because like I've heard a fairly similar thing where I've heard people say, oh, well, if I steal, I only steal from like Walmart. I don't steal from like mom and pop shops.
Yeah.
But Walmart's not actually going to feel the effects of you stealing from their store.
You are.
They're just going to say, oh, okay, well, this store is starting to see more and more crime, so we're just going to shut it down and fire all those people.
Yeah.
And then all those people are out of a job, and then you end up running into it's this catch-22 type thing.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people with that opinion were like, I'm not hurting the developers of the game. They've already been paid for their work. And that may be true now,
But
but even if they have gotten paid for this game, if the company doesn't make their money back on that game, they're not going to give those developers a job to make the next game.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, in that instance, while yes, they've gotten all the developers who've worked on that game have earned their money and they have gotten paid, but
yeah,
if that game doesn't sell anything, Nintendo's not going to say, "Hey, you guys did an excellent job on this. Make me another one." On the flip
um,
side of that, you have the consumer part of that. You know, they have their thing to do. On the other hand, the developers and the publishers of these games need to make it easy enough they need to make it easy enough for people to access this content and get a hold of this content. Make it easier to buy the content than it is to pirate the content.
and
We're seeing that conversation a lot right now with the Switch Online stuff and their increase
yeah,
in pricing, and people are like, "Well, I'll just emulate the N64 games," um,
yeah,
and that may be the right. I don't want to say it's the right thing to do, but I understand uh, that opinion because Nintendo is not making it easy to get a hold of these N64 games
yeah,
because they've upped the price more than double from what it was, and given people things that maybe they don't want that they have to they have to take advantage. You know, they have to get to
yeah,
access those N64 games. So if it's easier to buy and give you money to access that content than it is to download the file from the internet and play it on a computer, people will do
yeah,
that. And we've seen that a lot over the industry where if games are super cheap, games are free to play, whatever, people are more than willing to do that than they are to go and get an illegal copy of the game.
well, and it's very much like when the Sony announced that the PlayStation stores, the PS3, the Vita, and the PSP were closing. They still went ahead and closed the PSP store because it was just so disconnected from everything,
Yeah.
anyways. But essentially, there was such a backlash about them closing those stores because, like, I've recently tried to go back through my download list, and it's just a list. You scroll, you select something, then it
Mm-hmm.
takes you back to the top, and it is a very cumbersome process
Yeah.
across PS3 and Vita. But essentially, when they announced that they were going to close those stores, there's hundreds of games that are only available on those digital storefronts, and if
Yeah.
those storefronts close, those games are gone.
Yeah. And you have no
They
way to
they
get
are
them.
yeah, and like that started to kind of shift my overall opinion for emulation because it's like if Sony's going to take the steps to make it inaccessible to get these games, to make it so impossible to actually give these developers or publishers the money that you know they should get for these games, then you might as well emulate it because like
Yeah.
Sony themselves are saying, hey, we're taking the store offline.
Yeah.
You're
We
not going
don't
to be
want
able to
your
play
money
these
for
games.
this, is what they're
Yeah.
saying.
And like Microsoft is doing a pretty good job. Like I know in like there's a rumor that in November they're going to be adding another like backwards compatibility patch
Mm-hmm.
for like current Xbox platforms to support more physical games, but also to provide more games to their store.
Yeah.
And it ends up going into this even bigger conversation that people are having about game preservation. Um, you know, back in at the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, developers, once they were done with something,
They
they
were done.
deleted the files
Yeah.
and moved on to the next project. Square Enix has done that with like Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, and
Mm-hmm.
these classic RPGs where once they were done, they deleted the file because they were like, we're never going back to this again. And then 20 years later, they're like, man, we could have gone back to that
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, they didn't think
Um,
about that at the time, where now
yeah,
that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, is being able to
yeah.
have access to this content going forward.
And that's the biggest like pro for, you know, emulating software is the fact that these games that are from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, it's one of those things where it's like it's not easy to get these games unless you want to spend hundreds of dollars
Yeah.
in the secondhand market to get these games physically.
Yeah.
But companies like Sony are razor edge. They're wanting to close these stores down,
Yeah. Whereas Microsoft is like, open up all the stores, just give everybody everything.
like Microsoft still puts Xbox 360 digital titles on sale.
Yeah.
Like Sony doesn't do deals on PS3 titles
Yeah.
or Vita titles or PSP titles.
You know what company could benefit the most from easily accessible emulation of their back catalog?
Nintendo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could make a literal gold mine
Yeah.
by just putting everything out there and
Yeah.
putting everything out there for people to get now, and whenever the next Switch comes out, they don't have to buy it again. Follow
Yeah.
the lead of Microsoft. Put your entire library out there. People will give you all of the money,
Yep.
and then make sure that it's easily available on the next system. Like many of the topics we talk about on this show, we could spend 2 hours talking about this, and then that would unlock another conversation that we could easily go on for another 2 hours about.
But this is definitely one of those things that we can dive back into, in a future episode, because game preservation is a huge topic.
Yep.
But let us know in the comments, what you think as far as emulation, ROMs. What do you think of the Metroid Dread situation? How the Switch is doing sales-wise, not sales-wise, how light, all that kind of stuff. In the comments, let us all know. Like I said, this actually came from a viewer that was like, "Hey, you guys should talk about emulation." And weirdly enough, it fell in with what's going on with Nintendo and Dread and all that kind of stuff. So I'm Jeff from Just One More Level.
And I'm Tony from Procedurally Generated.
And we will see you with the next episode of GamerVision.